Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. It's a pleasure to be with you again. And today we're back to our original idea, previewing Sfarim on a Masechta. However, Masechta's Gittin could be a little different than other Masechtas. This episode, we're going to focus on the Rishonim and the Achronim like we've done in the past. But we hope to get to other episodes which will focus on the halachas of Gittin, how a get is written. There are many Sfarim written on that, and hopefully, perhaps we'll get to another couple episodes on what we call pulmusin, controversies, known controversies, unknown controversies on Gittin that have transpired throughout the generations. We have recorded a wonderful episode on Birchas Kayanim. I hope you've enjoyed it already. Please comment on this episode, other episodes, comments, suggestions, feedback to myself, shwadeM@ou.org, to Rabbi Brut, Eliezer Brut @gmail.com. And I would like to say that this episode has been generously sponsored by the Shaul Greenwald Daf series. This Daf series, this Daf Yomi Shir, is unique in that it quickly goes through the Daf, but not just reading and saying the translation of the words, really speaking out anything that comes up as a question on the Daf in a quick, very thorough way. If there's an obvious question that Tosfos covers, he discusses that as well. Very clear, very concise, usually done in under a half an hour. Please check that out. It's available on all Daf. It is also available in other places. It's available on podcast. If you haven't checked that out, please check it out. It's a unique shir, something different than the other shiurim that we have on all Daf, and that's the point of all Daf, to provide shiurim that each one provides something a little bit different than the other. So, without further ado, Rabbi Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem.
Excellent. Okay, so as I mentioned in my brief introduction, perhaps I spoke too long already. People want to hear you. They don't want to hear me plapple. Today's episode is about Masechtas Gittin, and Rishonim, Achronim, other topics we'll leave for another time. And we're always available anytime we have someone who's sponsoring. We really, really appreciate it. This provides an opportunity for Rabbi Brut to get his work out there. He has so much in his brain that he needs to share. So this allows us to share it for the world to hear. So what are we talking about today? What specifically would you like to start off with?
So before we get to how we do normally, I'm just going to mention a story because it's a very nice story to begin with, and relates to Masechtas Gittin, as we'll see. Basically, in high school, I was introduced by hearing different shmuzin from the Rosh Yeshiva of my yeshiva, Shara Torah, Reb Zelig Epstein. He used to quote often a book about the Gadol Miminsk. The book was written by Yidra Meir Halperin, a very chashuv Talmid Chacham, and he wrote a book about the Minsk, who is known as the Minsker Gadol, one of the great Gedolim of Lita, who died in the early 1890s. Now, this book, the chiddush of this book, Meir Halperin, was he knew the Minsker Gadol personally very well. How did he know him? He was the Malamed, he was the hired tutor of the Minsker Gadol's children, and he learned with them, and some of them actually became tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. And you could see from this book, he was a very smart person, he was a very big Talmid Chacham, he understood a lot about learning in general, and he had incredible conversations about different type of topics with the Minsker Gadol as he spent a lot of time with him, and he recorded them in an unbelievable lashon. He had a tremendous command of the Hebrew language. So Reb Zelig used to always quote this book different times in different shmuzin, and I read it numerous times. Every time I read it, even to look up 2 pages, I end up spending time looking at 20 pages. It's incredible amount of different information in this book. So one of the things that he mentions is when he first got the job, so the Minsker Gadol has him, he's talking to him, he learns with the kids afterwards, and basically the first week was made up that every Matzah Shabbos, I believe, they're going to learn, the kids are going to be tested by the Minsker Gadol. First week, they come in, Minsker Gadol starts asking them questions. It was about Masechtas Gittin. They had no idea what's going on. The second week, no idea. The third week, finally they knew what's going on. So Minsker Gadol asked them what happened, what's going on all of a sudden, how did they start knowing it? So he said, very simple. He says also that his chashivas of being a malamed is he was able to get into the heads of a child, what a child needs to know when he's learning. So you start learning Masechtas Gittin, you're jumping right into it, but you don't know what a get is. You don't know the psukim. You don't know all the different things. So what I do is first, I teach the kids. We open up the Chumash. We learn what a get is. Then what is the words get? I show them how it works. What's a shliach? I explain to them how a shliach works. All different concepts to give them the background, and then afterwards they build this up. We spend the first week or two doing this, and then afterwards everything starts making much more sense. And that's kachava why they succeeded in the bechina afterwards, because the first 2-3 weeks is so now Masechtas Gittin. It's an incredible Masechta. It's learned in, as we'll see shortly, but it's a yeshiva Masechta that's learned in many in yeshivas. Many people spend time learning it, and it's a Masechta that one could. It's easier than some other Nashim Nezikin Masechtas, and just as Kedai to know, keep in mind the mashal. Let's say you open up your art scroll, your Masifta, they have these pieces of information. You spend 10-15 minutes before, and you're ready. It's a different world. Okay.
Excellent. As you mentioned, I know here where I live in Lakewood, there are some 8th grades that learn Gittin as one of their limudim. So it's learned even at a young age. And what you just mentioned about getting familiar with the psukim and the get, I believe I saw advertised. You probably could check this out. Somebody selling some kind of kuntris or even a get, how a get how it looks, how a get is written, with some of the basic explanations of why this is here, and what goes into the background of the get. So you're familiar with the language of the get as you proceed in the Masechta. Okay, excellent. So where do you want to begin? You want to talk about the Gemara, the page of the Gemara itself?
So first, I'm not going to talk so much about the page of the Gemara. Just we always mention for 2 minutes, just to get this out of the way, is the nusach of the Gemara. So we have spoken about at length already in the Reb Chaim Kanievsky, in the series about Reb Chaim Kanievsky's farm, about the Dukduke Seifrim, his project of collecting the manuscripts of the Gemara, Masechtas Gittin. We were not zeicher to have his collection of the various manuscripts, including the manuscript Minchen. Okay, fast forward to 1926, Yid Rameir Simcha Feldblum in Yeshiva University, while working on his a book on Masechtas Gittin and his doctorate on Masechtas Gittin under his teacher at the time, Avram Weiss. So he's told, and he puts out, based on not only the Ksavya Minchen, the existing manuscripts that he was able to get a hold of, and he puts out what we've called a collection. On each page, a Gemara. On the other side is all the differences, and he tries to have explanations about this. This was in 1966. Now, at that time, still in Yeshiva, just as an anecdotal, is in Yeshiva University, at that time, they still had such a thing called academic Talmud, whatever that even means. Pretty much after that, at some point in time, it stopped. And there is no real academic Talmud, for whether it's good or bad, in Yeshiva University. But it used to exist a long time ago. Now, fast forward, if let's say someone doesn't have access to this, so Mechon Talmud Yisraeli, from through Encyclopedia Talmudis, different parts of this big Mechon, they have put out on Masechtas Gittin through all the different manuscripts, a few volumes. It can be found on, if you have Eitzar Chachma and stuff like that. Now, just to mention, there are academic works on parts of Masechtas Gittin. One is on the Perek Dalet, a massive work from Menachem Kahana. On Perek HaMegarish is a massive work from Professor Shama Friedman. And just to mention, on Mishnayos, there's a work from the Safrai family on the Masechta. But this is just to throw it out there, nothing more. Okay, the Kitzer, and one last point is like this. It's clear that, and as we're going to see today, Masechtas Gittin was learned everywhere. Very simple. It was very, very relevant. You look even as we're going to see soon, there's Ga'inim, there's Rishainim, and there's tons of Achrayim. It was in the part of the yeshiva cycle, in all different cycles, it was clear. Lamashal, we have the Netziv writes in Merayim Sadeh, Valajin. So Valajin are Chiddush, because Valajin they learned all of Shas, but it says on top of, not always does it say the dates when the Shiurim were, but in 1868, these are Shiurim, Merayim Sadeh, on Masechtas Gittin. Earlier in 1754, we have a Sefer Divrei Bina from Dovber Balachaver. We spoke about him briefly in the episode which about Birchas Kohanim. He also talks about how he learned Masechtas Gittin in Yeshiva, and we know from, as we'll see today, many other sources that he learned the Masechta. Okay, this is just the introduction. Now, what our minig has become is basically we go from the Ga'inim onwards. So Ga'inim is very fast. We have Baruch Hashem, also a sefer that we spoke a little bit more about in the Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shiurim, Eitzer Ga'inim from Bam Levine, a Talmud Muvik by Rav Kook. Tremendous Talmud Chacham. He collects tons of material from Ga'inic literature from all the different manuscripts, which he gave a little bit about that in some of the different episodes. and it's in a volume called Eitz Gainim. It's the 10th volume that he put out on different Masechtas on Shas. Masechtas Gittin has a very nice amount of material. He also has a lot of material that he collected from Rabbeinu Chananel. If you open up your Shas Vilna, you might have been used to in some Masechtas having Rabbeinu Chananel. This Masechta, we're going to see Shas Vilna didn't have Rabbeinu Chananel, but they have Toisis Rid that they printed for manuscript. He has Rabbeinu Chananel stuff that he's malakin. Okay, and if one wants to see just some samples of the significance of this Gainic material. So I've quoted in the past from Shlomo Yosef Zevin and Nosai from Visvarim. He has a review on this Masechta, with just some samples already in Masechtas Gittin about it. Okay. One last makar relating to Gainim, then we can move on, is in recent years, there's been an explosion of more and more material of Gainic literature. They found the long-lost work of Reb Shmuel ben Chafni Gain on Gittin. He wrote a massive work that was originally, it seems to be 55 prakim on Masechtas Gittin. In 2000 and what year is it? 2019, I believe it is. No, sorry, 2009. Basically, Yehuda Stamfer publishes. Earlier was his doctor, but he publishes Reb Shmuel ben Chafni. It's called Gain on Gittin. It's called Sefer Gerishin. And he has a whole arichos in the Hagdama, like all these types of works do, the significance of Reb Shmuel ben Chafni Gain, and the different parts of the work that he was able to locate in the Kaira Gniza. This Reb Shmuel ben Chafni Gain dies in 1013, so there's a very early work that we did not have until it was published a few years back. And he does not have all 55 prakim, but he has 13 whole prakim and parts of about 20 prakim sachakol. So something like a third of the work he has, something like that. And that's a very, very, very recent addition to our library on Masechtas Gittin. Okay, fine. This is Gainim. Now we can move on to the Rishainim. So Rishainim is very, very easy. We have our famous Rishainim, the Ramban. So Ramban, as we've mentioned in many different episodes, 1762, only parts of the Ramban is published. When does the Ramban on Gittin get published from manuscript? We discussed this a little bit more. The chashivas behind this from Issa Zal Meltzer, 1928. Lamaisa, fast forward, with Moshe Hirschler and his Mechon, they had more manuscripts of the Ramban. And today, you go into your shul library or your own library, whatever, there's different editions of works of the Ramban based on the manuscripts. Next is the Rashba. Rashba is actually published in 1523, again in 1715, again in 1751, a few other times. But today, in the standard Cook edition, they had manuscripts once again. Here we get to a little more interesting is the Ritva. When you open up your Ritva on Masechtas Gittin, you'll see that there's two Perushim. One part they call it the Ritva, and the second part they call Rav Kreskres. Now, like everything else, there's always a discussion. Is it really the Ritva? Is it really Ravena Kreskres? What's going on over here? Just to sum it up very, very briefly is as follows. There's an excellent Mavai in the Meister of Cook edition about it. It seems there were Achrayim that had manuscripts, and they called this work the Ritva. It's most likely not the Ritva. How they know that? Ayin Sham and these Hagdamas, they have different methods how they're able to do it. Now, one of the things is they notice that it brings a lot of the Ramah. The Ramah is earlier than these Rishayim, even earlier than the Ramban. He's born in 1170, dies about 1244. We'll get to more in a second. Now, so this work that Meister Cook calls it the Ritva is really most likely it's some type of Shitting Rebetza somewhere around that period of time of the Ritva, maybe a little before. And what it does is we notice it has a lot of Ramah. Okay, keep that in mind. It also has Rabbeinu Yaina. So we're not sure. At one point, the Meister Cook edition says, through different analysis, that it might be 3 different chiburim depending on the different parakim. It's different people. Okay. In other Masechtas of Meister of Cook, not every Masechta is done by the same person. So you'll have a different person who will say, oh, what you have a proof about Masechtas Gittin, it might not be. Anyway, they discuss this and all different things. What about Rabbeinu Kreskres? So Rabbeinu Kreskres, interestingly enough, was printed under the name of the Ritva already in 1758. But now, based on more information, we know more about this Rabbeinu Kreskres. He's also from the Ben Daira of the Ritva, same base Medrash. We have other Masechtas of his. We mentioned him in Ksuvis and there's some others. So they're more convinced that maybe this Ritva, this part is really Rabbeinu Kreskes, but even that is not 100%. Okay, now, why is this relevant? I mentioned to you the name, the Ramah, Rameir Abulafia. He's more famous in such a Masechta like Baba Basra, Sanhedrin, Yad Ramah. But interestingly enough, the original name of his chibur is called Prate Pratim. Okay, now, so Mechon Ofek from Rabbi Avram Shoshana, already in 1985, then through 1989, put out some editions of what he calls the Ramah on the Masechta. Then in 2001, he updated it with more based on more discoveries, and basically they have discovered pieces of the Ramah on this Masechta, and through careful analysis, he's convinced that what's called the Ritva is really the Ramah. Okay, and he has more than the Meister Cook edition. So anyway, you can have your Cook edition, even though it's calling a Ritva, it's Ramah, but you need to buy the Ofek edition because they found more stuff. Okay, whatever. Okay, the Ramah is an incredible, important Rishon. We know from the Masechtas that we do have of his. In order, the Ram Shoshan in his beautiful introduction has a lot about this. Bechlal, there's a book about him from Bernard Septimus, excellent book, just very hard to get these days, published by Harvard. And we have Tashma, Yisrael Tashma, in his essays, Knesses Mechkarim, Chelik Beis, has also a very important essay where he also goes with, he does agree with Shoshan about this. Okay, we already mentioned, Shas Vilna puts on the Taisus Rid. 1955, for the first time, the Meiri is published on this Masechta. Okay, and the Taisus Rosh is published. There's a Taisus Chachmei Anglia. Now, just one other point with the Ritva. People had it in manuscript. Lamashal Bam Levine, who we spoke about as a guide, he uses it. He had the Meiri because the person who was working on the Meiri was kind enough to give him material, so he's using it already in Yerushalayim earlier on. And just to be Messiah, one last Rishon literally came out about a year ago, actually from a new Machon. They're based in Beit Shemesh. They call themselves Bris Rishainim, and they published a work. They call it Pirish Rabbeinu Zakai. What is it? It's on the Rif and Masechtas Gittin. Very common. A lot of works in the time of the Rambam were written more on the Rif. And this is printed from manuscript. We don't know who he is. They believe he's around the time of the Rambam right after.
So for those who like to figure out correct pronunciation, I thought we used to pronounce this Rabbeinu Krashkash. Are we talking about the same one?
Correct.
So we'll have to have those
weigh in. We'll have to have weigh in. Exactly.
The Hebrew literature experts let us know exactly how to pronounce it.
Right. Correct. Okay. Now, so Adkan, the story with the Rishayim, yes, there's some others here and there, but that's the basic story with Rishayim. Now we move on to Achronim. So one of the early Achronim that we have, tremendous Gedolei, one of the Gedolei Achronim is the Marshal. So what's known is the Marshal, you have in the back of your Gemara, is you have the Marsha, for some reason it's on the top of the page in many editions, there's the Maram, and then there's the Chachma Shloima. Turns out the Chachma Shloima that we have in the back of the Gemara is much more abbreviated, there's really more material in the first editions of the Chachma Shloima, which are very rare, but thanks to Hebrew books, I'd say Chachma, they're no longer rare. Anyway, these are the Haggais that they took from the side of the Gemara that he wrote down. What Gemara did he use? Which edition of the Bramberg edition? This is dealt with in a doctorate from Yitzchak Ranan. Parts of this doctorate was published in a recent work, Messiah's Torah Shabbat Peh from Shlomo Zalman Hevlin. It was an article that this Ranan wrote in Ali Sefer, where he discusses the significance of knowing the differences with the Marshal, what he was using, what he's correcting. Now, what happens is, once the Marshal, this Gadol Hadar, does this, so a lot of printers do you the favor and they added in the corrections into the text already. Which could cause problems when you're trying to understand Rishayim and everything. This is a discussion not for now. Anyway, but when is this first time the Marshal, Chachma Shloima, on a Masechta is published? Literally a few years after he's nifter, in the 1580s. He's nifter in the 1570s. Okay. Now, but we will return to the Marshal momentarily. Now, another point relating to the Marshal is he has a Talmud, and this Talmud wrote a chibur called Migdal David. We don't know much about him. His son, we also know, published a few different things. His son, I think, publishes this work also, and he publishes a work in 1597 called Migdal David. This is an incredible chibur, and it seems no one knew about it 1597 and onwards, except a Yid Rav Leiter, which we'll get to. This Professor Spiegel points out already. We're going to get to Rav Leiter shortly. And Spiegel, who deals with the Migdal David, because the Migdal David, as a Talmud of the Marshal, is also very careful to be medayik in the text of the Gemara to see if there's mistakes that crept in. But besides for that, this Migdal David is Meirdik, Oimid, Pshat, Rashi, Taisus, Gemara, many different things. Now, 1597, okay, fast forward to 1990. Yitzchak Satz publishes it. He also publishes the first Chachma Shloima. This is, and for those that don't know, this is before Eitzar Chachma, before Hebrew books. So at the time, it was a major chiddush, and you still could probably even buy in some Svarim stores this edition of the Migdal David, virtually unknown sefer, Talmud of the Marshal, with incredible materials. And no one had it throughout the generations, pretty much, except possibly the Rav Leiter. Anyway, this is with the Marshal. Moving onwards, We always mention different Masechtas. The Pnei Yeshua is published in 1739. 1768, we have the Eliyah Rabbah, the famous Eliyah Rabbah, who dies in 1712. We know more from the world of halacha. He has a small chibur on a few Masechtas and Shas. 1769, we have a Yid Reb Simcha Rappaport writes a sefer called Rashbitz. Normally, Rashbitz is referring to either a Talmud of the is referring to a Svardi Chashava Pirish, a late Rishon. Okay, fast forward a little further, we have in 1813, then again in 1820, the Nesivus writes the Torah's Gittin, which in the yeshiva world, that remains a Murdika classic, sign Lambda, sign everything else. We've already devoted an episode, although we have not yet released it, we hope to soon, of the Nesivus, and that is a very unique and special chibur, Adhaya. His older contemporary, the Ksois, has a chibur, which also deals with Avnei Meluim, which we also mentioned at one point or another. This is famous, is published by his famous maskil son-in-law, the Shir Shloime Rappaport. Anyway, fine. We have another achron at this period of time. It's called Tiv Gittin from a Rav Heller. He's around the same age as them. Okay. Then, of course, we have Rabbi Kiveger and the Chassam Sofer. These are the known go-to achronim in many of the Masechtas. Nothing to, of course, you have the Areli edition of the Rebbe Kiveger, endless materials, as I like to always say, two gedolim that are constantly writing, even from the Kfarim, is Rebbe Kiveger and the Chassam Sofer. As a matter of fact, the Chassam Sofer just now in an auction that just was made is about to go live in a few weeks from Gnazim. They have some new material never published before, somewhere of a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer, quoting a whole letter of the Chassam Sofer. So obviously this item is going to fetch who knows how much money. That's an item. Okay, fine. Now, another parish that I did not know about, and the interesting way I found out about it was through an episode that I recorded. We recorded an episode, and we did release about the Aruch LaNer. So I did not know at the time the Aruch LaNer had a brother, Remeir, I believe his name was. So he wrote a chibur on Masechtas Gittin. It was published from manuscript 30, 40 years ago. So a fellow Ramapi Chemish, he's working on republishing. It's going to be out. We're recording the episode about Gittin a little before. It's being published by Mechon Shlomo Uman, and I spoke to the Mechon a few days ago. It's going to Mirza Hashem be out in time. They have new materials from the Kaivet Zion Nemon that we spoke about in the episode, where he has other materials of this brother who was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, headed a klois in that period of time in Germany. Okay. So this is just some of the achronim. So there's already, you're seeing obviously that there's a lot of achronim. Fast forward, someone relating to the Chassam Sofer, and remarked he's not a Talmud, but someone who knew them, it seems, the Kedushas Yisrael. His early chibur, Chelik Aleph, was published in 1788, has Askamas of the Gedolei Adar, including the Noda B'Yehuda. So his second volume, published by his children, which has on Masechtas Gittin, this has Askamas from the Chassam Sofer and Ramar Trebenet. Okay, fast forward. We just mentioned the Chassam Sofer, so now here we'll discuss, we'll get a little more information. First, we'll start with the Ksav Sofer. So first, I'm looking into the Ksav Sofer has published on a few different Masechtas. When you look in, one of the Masechtas that we have for the Ksav Sofer is Masechtas Gittin. I'm reading the Hagdama because I remember a idea about something to relating to this, and basically it sounds like he gave shir on it, starting from, it says in Hagdama, my father gave shir on Masechtas Gittin, starting from Taf Reish Tes Zayin until Taf Reish Chav Beis. That means there's a period of almost 5 years. Then it talks about another time he started giving it again. So with Kitzer, they're learning this Masechta for a crazy long time. Imagine sitting in yeshiva for that many years learning the Masechta. Now, yes, Masechta's Gittin. We're going to see another person also spend 5 years learning it. There's what to do with Masechta's Gittin, especially if you're learning Aliva de Hilchasa. But what's going on over here? So I remembered elsewhere that, again, turning to one of my favorite people, Rosh Yosef Zevin, there's a review about the Ksav Sofer on Masechtas Chulin, where there's a similar type of thing that Masechtas Chulin, they spent endless amount of time. So L'maisa, the Chassam Sofer says he heard from a Ravram Sofer, which we also spoke about in the episodes relating to the Miri, that he spoke, who's from the Mishpacha of the Sofers. He says like this, that when he came in to learn, the Ksav Sofer came into yeshiva and they were learning a sugya in Gittin that relates to Hilchas Mikvais. What does the Ksav Sofer start doing? They start learning all different sugyas relating to Mikvais and Gan Shas. And this was the mahal. One of the nakudis with the Ksav Sofer was he ended up. This is what the Akiva Sofer says. He ended up spending 3 months learning in Yanim and Mikvais. This is while they're learning Gittin. So that's the answer. How come they're spending 5 years on Masechtas Gittin? It's not that they only were. It's not like they were There's yeshivas today. There's the famous yeshiva today. Back in my day, 20 years ago, they learned Takfa Kain one whole winter's man. So this is not that, even though it's 5 years. But anyway, gives you an idea. This is where Zevin brings down. But we know more. Also, some other interesting things about the Beis Medrash Ksav Sofer can be found in Avram Fuchs's work on the yeshivas of Hungary. Okay, fine. Now, continuing with the Chassam Sofer, is one of the most incredible svarim on Masechtas Gittin, but it's only on the first parak, is from Reb Chaim Sofer. It's called the Pelas Chaim. The Pelas Chaim, he's in 1821, he's born, he dies in 1886. He publishes the Pelas Chaim in 1854. Now, they say in the yeshiva world is lore, folklore, and from all different. I've heard from all different ways. I didn't bother to write them all down at one point to track it, but they say he's the Hungarian Reb Chaim. That Reb Chaim even looked at his Torah. You say obviously those that know the literature world wouldn't be caught dead looking at Hungarian Torah, but this Reb Chaim Sofer, he made it that even Reb Chaim, they say on his table. I always joke that one day I plan on writing an article about all the svarim that were on Reb Chaim's table. It must have been a very big table. But anyway, that's a joke that I've said, I think, in the past. Anyway, here I would like to add to something I said when we began the series on Reb Chaim Kanievsky. I said, as an example, Reb Chaim Sofer was a big Talmud muvak by the Chassam Sofer. And someone wrote into me, more than one person, maybe that I'm wrong, it doesn't work out with the years, it's not true. He went to the yeshiva at the age of 11. And anyone who understands the Machne Chaim, the Tshuva Sefer, it's not so strange. He was there until the Chassam Sofer was nifter. He learned by him for 7 years. If the Machne Chaim learned by him for 7 years, trust me, he got a lot from the Chassam Sofer. He writes himself in his Pelas Chaim in the Akdama. One of the people who's giving a Karas Taif, he lists his Rabbeim. One of those Rabbeim, he says, the first one is the Chassam Sofer. So I was correct in what I was saying then. Now, what's more interesting, not more interesting, another last point is, he's a Talmud of the Shari Torah, who's the son of Rabbi Eliezer Lau. So now, who's the author of the Shemer Rekeach. Now, some people like to think this is Hungarian roots. It turns out really it's more literature roots. This is a different discussion, and that might explain how this Hungarian could have ties with literature learning, which is a kasha that many have asked, but we're not going to deal with it right now. Just to mention, this Rebbe, the Shari Torah, so we quoted already the Gnazim catalog, and we are not, at this point, I'm doing this is like this. Catalogs, a lot of times, people look at catalogs for different reasons. I look at catalogs, I don't have money to buy rare books and stuff like that, but you learn a lot of information from the catalog. So here we have, it's going to go on auction in a week or two, that they have the Sefer Shari Torah, the Rebbe of the Machne Chaim, with 50 Hagoyis, I believe they were not published, of the Machne Chaim, never published before. It's also going to probably go for a very nice sum of money in the Gnazim auction. Okay. Anyway, fast forward, noch a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer is called Zichron Shmuel. 1867 is published. This is another younger Talmud of the Chassam Sofer.
If anybody wants to buy you a present, I'm sure you'll be glad to accept, maybe make a list of the things in the Gnazim catalog that may interest you.
Oh, yeah,
and
sure.
Anyone that buys any artifact, you'll dedicate episode just towards that artifact and give the history.
Discuss the chashivas of the artifact. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, okay, now, because I've been accused in the past of never really speaking out about Hungarian Gedolim, so here's already, I've been yaitz. We're going to do a drop more yaitzazayim with Hungarians in a moment. Okay, one last person to talk about is the Tferes Yankov, Rabbi Yankov Gesundheit. I believe that's how something like that is how they say his name. Okay, so this is a Yid. He's born in 1815, dies in 1878. Saif Yamav, he becomes the Rav of Varsha. This is a ganze Tummel. Professor Shol Stamfer has a whole big arichos article, a very nice article, which is available in PDF. If you ask for it, I'll send it to you, where he deals with the whole story of him, why it took so long for him to become the Rav in Varsha and everything. Now, Varsha is not a small little city. It's a real big city, a lot happening there. Anyway, he was living there for a long time. And his Rebbe Muvok is a Yid Rabbi Leib Tzins, famous Gedolei Achronim, who also wrote a massive work on Gittin, which is Rabbi Leib Tzins dies in 1833. His first work is published in 1869 on Gittin, so to speak. Yeah.
Rabbi Leib Tzins shares a yard site with Shaila Karastir, I believe, and last week when they were celebrating Shaila Karastir, so the people who are Rabbi Leib Tzins, who are Makir, his Gadlos, and know, you could tell us what his tzava is about printing svarim. Made sure to let everybody know about this. What did he write about? Just tell the audience what he wrote about his svarim.
It's terrible right now what you just did, because now people are going to accuse me of becoming Hungarian, and it's not Pasha, not right. Anyway, but the point is, Rabbi Leitzins was a guy in Olam, and he was a prolific writer, and he said some type of thing in Tzava that it's going to be murder if you help publish his Svarim, and this is brought down in very reliable places. Even the Stiper talks about it in Archas Rabbeinu, and there's other sources about this Nakuda. But he was prolific. Every once in a while, I remember when I was learning in Lakewood, Lamashal, someone would come, let's say whatever Masechta is, and drop off a bunch on that Masechta. And then people always printing it. You go to used bookshops in America all over, you could get for $1 all different Svarim of his. But to go so far, there's been a fancy machon that went ahead and they redid all his stuff, but they don't sell it. So I don't know what was the point of that they published it, the schusses, to get it out there. But okay, I think they did give it to Kailos and stuff like that. Okay, anyway, returning back to Tferes Yankiv. So Tferes Yankiv, Lamashal, in a tremendous askama from the Shalom Meshiv, in one of his svarim, he mamish says how he's murdered. It's unbelievable. Mafliya pliois in Talmud Upaiskim, murdered l'shaynis. Now, the Talmidim of his who published Gittin, okay, they write when they're talking about it that he spent 5 years learning the Masechta. In 1858 when they publish it, and this also it seems there was some type of work, a small work published b'chayav about him. Shol Stamfer still has not been able to solve who the author is, but at one point or another, this is published in the different svarim of the Tferes Yankiv. He wrote other Masechtas also on Chulin and some other things, and it's called Ksas Toldos Hagoyin Mechaber, but there it doesn't even say that it came from where it came from, but it was published as a small little booklet, but in none of the places do we know who it is. Anyway, the point is that this Gadol, he learned Be'iyun, he learned the Rishainim, he was very into Amkus, Svaras, all different types of things, and this he was crazy into Rabbi Akiva Eiger. He was very close to Rabbi Akiva Eiger. At one point, Soif Yom of Rabbi Akiva Eiger ends up visiting Varsha. They had tremendous kesher, talking to each other and learning. And Bekitzer, he was a guy in Olam. He also, rather interesting, they write, he also knew Mar Nevuchim. He worked. He was a businessman. He had a yeshiva. He started giving shir at a young age of 16. He's already giving shir. Okay. In his introduction, to the Sefer, he talks about how one has to learn. It's a fascinating introduction. Kedai, I'm not doing it justice, but in the Hagdama, he does mention that he works. That's one interesting thing. And he says sometimes I go against Achronim, but that's the point of learning. If you learn the sugya and you learn properly, that's what was given to us. Torah was given for if you're learning api with bakashas emes, it's to come up with your own maskanos. Anyway, incredible. It's not a long hagdama, but it's worth to go through and see how he talks about this topic. Okay, one last achron to talk about before World War II is Revolkin, Rabbaran Volkin, mamish right before World War II publishes the base Aaron, and recently a book came out all about him. Okay, now Adkan Achronim that came out, known Achronim. Now, just to conclude with a few different ideas, it's like this. In 1959, the Chidushei Harim on Gittin comes out. More recently, first in 1999, and then more updated in 2021, Reb Mordechai Emanuel prints a work, Binyan Shleima, from manuscript. Who was this? This is Rav Paz, who was Reb Nassim. I don't want to say his name wrong, but he wrote a tremendous Chibur Binyan Shleima. He was a dayan in the Frankfurt Bezdin with Afla. Rav David Kamenetsky published in Yeshurun Chelech Avdal Chafei materials of his involved in the Bezdin, and some letters of his. A tremendous Adam Gadol at that time. He did write works already at the young age, that he did publish on Masechta Sanhedrin, which has a chashav askamas from the Noidim Yehuda. Akapanim, a tremendous Adam Gadol, and today you could get the book on Amazon, actually print on demand. This is the Binyan Shleima. Another work that just came out from Mechayin Shlomo Uman recently is from Avram Abel Katz. He's born in 1810, dies in 1890. He also seems to be a Talmud of Reb Shem Rekeach, who we mentioned with the Machne Chaim. He's a Rav Lamashal of different cities, including Kashuf. Some of his farm were published in his lifetime. They have askamas Lamashal of leading Gedolim, such as the Divrei Chaim, the Shalom Eshiv. He left behind various ksavim, including Psachim and Gittin. But Kitzer, this work was miraculously saved from the Holocaust, and the anicle of the person who saved it, the son or the anicle, I think the son of the person who saved it, the anicle, a great great grandson of this Rabbi Avram Abela, a fellow Rabbi Aaron Friedman, funded this work to come out with a beautiful Agdama about his family and about this Gadol. And Mechon Shleimuman published it last year, a massive work on the Masechta, and one could get it probably in most farm stores. Okay, now just to Messiah with one last chibur. This is a tremendous, tremendous chibur on the Masechta. Every time I use it, it's Chalishas Adas, even not learning Gittin, and that is Mitayrasan Shal Rishainim from Reb Zev Wolf Leiter. Reb Zev Wolf Leiter, he's born in 1891, dies in 1974. He was a Gaon Olam. He knew incredible amounts of Torah. He had one of the things he's legendary about is he had a tremendous library with unbelievable amounts of farm. He's a Rav in Pittsburgh eventually. From Galicia, he ends up in Pittsburgh. He dies in 1974. I mentioned he had manuscripts of tremendous Chashiva works, and these Ha'aros on Masechtas Gittin. Interestingly enough, it seems his first work that he wrote before the age of Bar Mitzvah was on Masechtas Gittin, but it was not published. But these notes of his on Masechtas Gittin, a very nice amount of material, over 100 pages, has been published a few times by Mechon Shalayim, is I think the most recent edition. It's called Mitaras and Shori Shainim. One could get unbelievable amounts of information, stealing for shiurim, impress people without them knowing, even though that they won't be chayshish use Leitzar Chachma, even from some of the farm, because even some of the farm that he's using cannot be found in Leitzar Chachma. Akopanim, incredible work. That's the last Achron. Now, just to end off with two more points, and that's it. Number one is, so it shouldn't be accused, this Masechta is learned in all the yeshivas. Every Rosh Yeshiva has this chidushim of them. Just to mention, was available on Hebrew books, is a sefer called Tyrus Rosh Yeshivas, where someone was malake tons and tons of Tyrus of Rosh Yeshivas. So let's say you don't have time to learn whichever Rosh Yeshiva, all the different svarim that are coming out, and they're still coming out as we speak on this Masechta. You could download on Hebrew books. You don't even have to have with Eitzah Chachma, and you have a massive work, hundreds of pages on the Masechta from the Gedolei Rosh Yeshivas Alikut. Okay, now we already said in the introduction that we're going to talk about other aspects of this Masechta. Just to conclude, there's a work called, just to conclude, just a drop of historical stuff. There's endless different controversies that relate to this Masechta. Lamashal in America, what happened, tons of shilos in Gittin from when Jews came to America, and etc., etc. So there's a recent work from Akiva Sternberg called Eretz Lo Noidas. And in here one could find a nice amount of material to spice up when you learn the Masechtas Gittin, make it relevant sometimes with historical Farik Tshuva and stuff like that. He talks about a lot of this stuff. And just two other Makairis for now is one is there's a Rav of Firth, which a book recently came out, I think it was last year, from Reb David Kahana Spiro. He was known as the Firther Rav. So this book was printed by Dr. Rosenfeld. He was zeicha to be very close. His family is very close with this Rav. One of the things this Rav was very famous for being an expert in Gittin, especially after World War II. And there's a nice amount of material, one whole massive chapter about with Gittin. And just to conclude, Mechon Yerushalayim just published a few months ago a chuvas called Chuvas Nechamas Shleima from Reb Shlomo David Kahana, who was known as the father of Agunis. Also, this Chuva Sefer, he was also very involved after the war with different inyanim with Gittin and Aguna type of shilas. Also, a wealth of information that was not available until just recently. So that, but with Mirza Hashem, we will get much more into these type of topics in the near future.
Okay, thank you very, very much. A lot of fascinating svarim, some interesting svarim to track down that perhaps you may not have in your library. And we're really looking forward to the other episodes. Anybody who would like to be in touch again to ask for any sources, PDFs, email eliezerbrat@gmail.com. Once again, we appreciate the sponsor in honor of Rabbi Shaul Greenwald's Daf Yomi Shir. The style we mentioned is quick, very, very thorough, very complete, covers basically all the Rashis and also the Taisvis that are relevant to the Pshat in the Gemara. And we hope to have other episodes available. If you'd like to sponsor the tremendous work of Rabbi Brut, please let us know. Yes, Rabbi Brut.
Also, one last thing I forgot, this is very, very important for me, is like this. We spoke about the Marshal one last thing to add to this whole thing is there's a Yamshel Shloima on this Masechta. But what's interesting is that it's published when? In 1761, which is almost 200 years after his nifter. As we said, he's nifter in 1573. So it takes so many years for it to come out, which is an interesting discussion. Not for now, but I can't go without mentioning the Marshal was on the. We spoke a little bit about him, but there is a tremendous important chibur of his available today called Yamshel Shloima on the Masechta. So I missed from my notes where to put it in.
Okay, thank you very much for adding that. The Pelas Chaim, the Reb Chaim of Hungary, we could get all the feedback. We mentioned some of the Hungarian Sfarim, and Baruch Hashem, we got it all in. So thank you very much, and let's be in touch soon.